And we are back. New York City's housing crisis is unlike any other in the country. Rents soaring to record highs, with the typical rent nearing $3,500 a month. Meanwhile, apartment vacancy rates have hit historic lows, making it incredibly difficult for residents to find affordable housing. Yet, amid these challenges, one surprising statistic stands out. Eviction filings remain significantly below pre-pandemic levels. Here now discussing more is the Communication and Policy Engagement Manager at the Eviction Lab, Juan Pablo Garnham. And we thank you so much, Juan Pablo, for being with us. When we talk about these numbers, I mean, that's kind of like the opposite direction. You're seeing things where it's not going in that direction. One would automatically assume such. What's the reason why?
Yeah, there's well. First, thank you so much for this opportunity, Darren. I think it's an interesting story. What we see is that even though we have this incredibly expensive and tight market, we do have this good news. And the main reason why, like telling this story very briefly, is policy. So we have had in New York City a series of long-term policies that have promoted tenant stability, that have given rights to tenants that in many places in the United States they don't have, and that have kept evictions at numbers that are much lower than what New York City used to see in like 2015, for example.
Yeah. We were having this conversation on the show for a long time. I think when we were coming out of COVID, my anticipation was knowing that there was that whole, rent crisis and people not paying their rent, having issues, landlord-tenant issues, that we would see definitely more and more evictions given the fact that there was a moratorium on this right here. But we've seen that New York is able to corner the market, and it's not as it's not it's bad, but it certainly is not as bad as a lot of people have anticipated. For yourself, I know you've got boots on the ground. Share with us a little bit more about these programs that are out here trying to make sure that people can avoid eviction.
Yeah, and it's true what you're saying. Like everyone would have thought that things would go back to those that horrible normal that we had, and it's true also that New York being so big, uh, we still see a lot of evictions. So we see more than 100,000 eviction filings every year, and that's a lot of people struggling. But at the same time, it's true that if you look at it proportionately, and if we compare it to previous years, the numbers are much lower. So we got the rental protections during the pandemic. Numbers dip to incredibly low levels, to historically low levels, and then as the rent assistance ended, the moratorium ended, those numbers start going up, but they never went up to the levels that we would have seen 8 years ago. And I think there's several things that have happened that are long term, that starting in 2017, that have helped in that way. One of those ones is that New York City was the first city to have right to counsel. And what that means is that tenants are able to have a lawyer to help them in the process of an eviction. And that might sound, for people that haven't experienced an eviction, as something obvious, like we always hear about. You have the right to an attorney, like in movies, in TV. But the truth is that this doesn't apply to evictions, like at least at a federal level, because evictions are a civil matter, right? And in civil matters, we are not entitled to have an attorney. Um, and New York City was the first city in the country to have that. And that program was slowly kind of expanded, and now we have it fully across the city. And it's really important that people know about it and that they can ask for a lawyer for an eviction, because it can really change the outcome. But then we had a series of other laws that happened in 2019. We had the Housing Stability and Tenant Protection Act that allowed more protections to tenants. Then obviously we had the COVID protections that we spoke before. And now in 2024, we have the Good Cause Law, which is another protection that tenants have gained. It's like a huge victory for tenants in New York City. And all of those kind of have like this cascading effect, where when it's kind of really difficult to know what was the effect of each one of these programs and initiatives. But the truth is that it seems that they've all contributed a lot to keep these numbers low.
Juan Pablo, when we talk about access to information, that's very critical, right? I mean, if a
Mhm.
tenant doesn't know what their rights and what their protections are, they very easily could be out on the street. We've seen that happen. When we
Yeah.
talk about tenant protection laws, how do we improve them? Because there got to be some gaps that are out there. Because even with people with boots on the ground, they're saying that there's still a lot of gaps.
Yeah, for sure. And I think there are so many things that we can do. There's clearly not like one silver bullet to ending our eviction crisis, but also to ending our housing crisis. There's like so many things that we can do. Politicians all over the country are trying different approaches, and in New York City, for sure we have some things that are on the works. But there are many things. For example, in terms of right to counsel, you mentioned like people still might have difficulty or might not know that it's there. And I think engagement and information is really really important. So just like to promote these issues, it's something like key, and for people to know it, for them to be there be like ads in different languages, and people to really feel empowered to go to court if they have to. Hopefully they don't have to. That's really important. There are other things that can be done, like expansion of public housing and vouchers, better zoning to promote affordable housing construction. It's really important. Um, Creating laws that instead of like promoting landlords to use eviction as a solution of any problem, try to find middle ground and conversation. So for example, in Philadelphia, there's a great program of mediation and what it's called eviction diversion, and so on. So there's many options for policymakers, and it's really really important to explore them, to evaluate them, and to see if they are getting results.
We always talk about tenants, but also let's talk about the landlords. What are you hearing from landlords in terms of concerns? They've got some serious concerns in all of this as well.
Yeah, and it's really important to know that landlords are a key part of this problem, right? Um, what we know from our research is that most landlords rarely evict. Eviction is not something that they have to do like every day, but there are some landlords that evict incredibly, like in a huge amounts. In New York City, we don't have data for that, but in other cities, we see that like uh, 25% or 15% or 30% of all evictions in a city are done by just 100 landlords. So that's the first thing. Um, and it's important that if we want to solve the problems of affordability that we have, that we also kind of like have a government that works with landlords and offers them possibility to you know to find solutions like rental assistance, um, for getting paid and for being able to sustain and maintain the buildings that they have, because no one wants tenants to be living in substandard buildings, and so on, right? So they are a key part of this problem, and I think that's something that we also have to have in mind.
Yeah. We've got a big problem in New York City, and you know that that's the homeless crisis. And obviously, when you talk about the homeless crisis, and then you couple that against when we're talking about landlords and evictions, there's got to be a bridge somewhere, right? How do we deal with the homeless and keep them from being homeless? And then you've also got other people who really are on the verge of becoming homeless through eviction. Uh,
Yeah.
you know, from your perspective, how do we handle this balancing act?
Well, I think New York, in that sense, is on a good road compared to many other cities, because what you're doing with these laws that I mentioned before is that you are creating forms for people to avoid homelessness, right? So, like in many places, one of the bigger problems is that you create, for example, housing for homelessness for people that are experiencing homelessness, but then you are making more people homeless at the same time, right? Like because like you have to stop, like that flow of that inflow of people coming into homelessness first. Now, if we look at like the bigger picture, what we need in New York City, what we need in everywhere in the country is more housing, and cheaper housing. We see that throughout the last 20 or 30 years, um, incomes haven't grown to the pace that rents have grown, and that's like the main problem that explains all the issues that we see in terms of housing affordability and homelessness. So New York City really has to put like a lot of efforts in terms of bridging that gap, and either making people to have better incomes, and also like lowering rent costs. And one of the ways to do that is to build more, to have more supply also of permanent affordable housing. That's really really important, because if we don't solve that big question that we're talking about, we're gonna keep having problems of homelessness, and problems of evictions. Yeah.
Yeah, Juan Pablo, we got to leave it there, but I want to thank you so much. I think there's a lot to be said for homelessness and definitely evictions. As we said, it's pretty interesting. We thought that we would see more, and thank God we don't. That means there's been some great work that's being done, and persons such as yourself are really making the difference in bringing awareness and then also making it happen. So thank you for the work that you do, Community and Policy Engagement and Manager at the Eviction Lab. Thanks a lot for being with us.
Thank you so much, Darren.
All righty. Well, listen, I want to tell people if you want more information, go ahead, visit the website, evictionlab.org. Go also follow them on social media at Eviction Lab.